There's a certain type of person who can make others recoil without saying a single word. They walk into a room and everything changes. Conversations become awkward, eyes dart away, and no one can quite explain why. Huberman studied this very phenomenon in his Stanford lab. Jung mapped out this psychological type over a century ago. And what both of them discovered will shatter everything you thought you knew about sensitivity, power, and fear. I'm talking about the awakened, highly sensitive person, the awakened HSP. I'm not talking about the hypersensitive person who absorbs everyone else's emotions, who burns out trying to please everyone, who apologizes for simply existing. I'm talking about something completely different. I'm talking about the HSP who has walked through fire, who has been utterly destroyed, who has faced their shadow and emerged on the other side transformed into something that science is still struggling to understand. Jung called this process individuation. Huberman calls it targeted neuroplasticity. But regardless of the name, the result is the same. A person who carries a frequency that most others simply cannot withstand. A presence that activates the unconscious of everyone around them. An authenticity so raw that it acts as a mirror for those who haven't yet confronted their own shadows. And here's what no one tells you. This person isn't feared because they're aggressive. They're not feared because they threaten anyone. They're feared because their mere existence exposes the lie that others tell themselves. Hold on to that idea. It will make sense when I reveal what neuroscience has discovered about why this happens. Before we go any further, I need to tell you about a study published in March of 2024 on the bioRxiv repository. Researchers measured the brain activity of people with high sensory processing sensitivity while they watched emotionally charged scenes. What they found was disturbing. The brain of the highly sensitive person doesn't function like the standard brain. The insula, the region responsible for interoception and empathy, showed significantly higher activation. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for deep cognitive processing, was in overdrive. The amygdala, the center of fear and emotions, responded in a completely different way. But here's the discovery that researchers weren't expecting. There was increased neural synchronization. The hypersensitive brain was processing information on levels that the normal brain simply cannot access. They were literally perceiving layers of reality that go unnoticed by the majority. Let me be more specific about what this means neurologically. The study showed increased activation in the precuneus, a region associated with mental self-representation. It showed activation in the inferior frontal gyrus, related to response inhibition. It showed activation in the claustrum, responsible for sensory integration. These regions don't function in isolation. They form a network. And in the highly sensitive person, this network operates at a level of complexity that drastically surpasses the average. Jung knew this a century ago. In Psychological Types, published in 1921, he described the introverted intuitive as someone destined to be misunderstood, someone who sees what others don't see, someone who carries a perception so profound that the world around them seems superficial in comparison. But Jung went even further. He said that this type of person has a specific role in the evolution of human consciousness. They are bridges between the collective unconscious and conscious reality. They carry archetypes. They manifest patterns that humanity needs to integrate. A recent video analyzing Jung's teachings identified 8 characteristics that suggest a rare personality. Among them are emotional intensity and profound curiosity. Traits that society often labels as defects are actually markers of a powerful psychological type. And when this type of person goes through the process of individuation, when they stop suppressing their nature and begin to live it fully, something changes fundamentally. They become rare, and they become feared. Hang tight, because what I'm about to reveal now will connect all of this in a way that you'll never forget. There's a psychological dynamic that Jung mapped out, and that modern neuroscience is finally validating. He called it shadow projection, and it explains why the awakened HSP causes visceral discomfort in certain people. It works like this. Every human being has a shadow. The shadow contains everything that we reject in ourselves, our fears, our weaknesses, but also our undeveloped talents, our suppressed authenticity, our unlived greatness. When you meet someone who is living what you have repressed, your unconscious reacts, and this reaction manifests as discomfort, as inexplicable irritation, as fear. An article published in the journal Frontiers in Psychiatry in 2023 examined this from a neurological perspective. Researchers discovered that the right anterior insula, a crucial region in the threat detection system, responds atypically when we encounter people who activate our shadow. The article specifies that a dysfunction in the right anterior insula creates a disturbed estimation of certain effective stimuli from the external world that are perceived as intimidating. This increases sensitization with obstacles in moderating the response of the threat detection system. In other words, our brains literally interpret authenticity as a threat, not because the authentic person is going to hurt us, but because they force us to confront everything that we hide from ourselves. And that's exactly what the awakened, highly sensitive person does. Their presence is a mirror, and most people don't want to see what's reflected. Now pay attention, because I'm going to show you the exact journey that transforms a common HSP into something rare and genuinely feared. Jung mapped out 4 alchemical stages of transformation: nigredo, albedo, citrinitas, rubedo. Modern neuroscience has validated each of these stages in terms of measurable brain changes. The first stage is the nigredo, the darkness, the death of the ego. It's when everything falls apart, when the masks we've worn our entire lives stop working, when the pain becomes unbearable. For the highly sensitive person, this stage is particularly brutal. Why? Because they feel everything more intensely. Research published in 2025 in the journal Behavioral Psychology confirms that highly sensitive people use fewer emotional defense mechanisms. They feel the pain in its entirety, without filters, without buffers. The study observed that HSPs internalize emotions with less external expression. This may seem like a weakness, but it's exactly what allows the deep processing that leads to real transformation. And it is devastating, but it's also absolutely necessary. Huberman explains that neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself, happens most intensely during states of high emotional activation. Agitation, tension, discomfort. These aren't obstacles to growth. They are the catalysts themselves. He describes 3 essential elements: urgency, focus, and quality sleep. When these 3 elements converge during a period of intense stress, the brain enters a state of self-directed adaptive plasticity. So, when the awakened, highly sensitive person goes through the nigredo, when they face total darkness without escaping, their brain literally reconfigures itself. New neural connections form, old patterns dissolve, and something new emerges from the ashes. The second stage is the albedo, the whitening. This is when the person starts to see clearly what was hidden, when they start to separate what is theirs from what was imposed by others. For the awakened, highly sensitive person, this is the moment when they stop absorbing everyone's emotions. They learn to distinguish what they feel from what others project onto them. They develop solid psychological boundaries. Neurologically, This corresponds to the strengthening of connections between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. The awakened, highly sensitive person gains the ability to regulate their emotional responses autonomously. They no longer depend on the external environment to feel good. Research published in 2025 found significant differences in emotional regulation and subjective well-being in highly sensitive people. Those who developed greater regulatory capacity showed a significant positive correlation with well-being. Emotional regulation functions as a protective factor. The third stage is the citrinitas, the yellowing. This is when consciousness expands, when the person starts to integrate aspects of the shadow that were previously rejected. Carl Jung said something disturbing about this stage. He said that the shadow doesn't only contain our negative aspects, it also contains our golden shadow, our undeveloped talents, our unlived greatness, our ability to not care what others think. For the awakened, highly sensitive person, citrinitas is the moment when they reclaim their power. They stop apologizing for feeling too much. They stop diminishing themselves to fit into the molds that others created. They begin to occupy the space that has always been legitimately theirs. Researchers at the Applied Jung Foundation describe this stage as the moment when the person begins to manifest qualities that previously seemed to belong only to others. The greatness they admired in external figures begins to emerge from within. And the fourth stage is the rubedo, the reddening, the union of opposites. Complete integration. This is the moment when the awakened, highly sensitive person becomes what Carl Jung called individuated, a whole person. Not perfect, whole, with light and shadow integrated, with sensitivity and strength coexisting without conflict. And here's the paradox that science confirms. The more integrated a person becomes, the more they unsettle those who are still fragmented. A study published in the Journal of Neuroscience in 2024 showed that different types of fear activate different brain regions. The fear of an authentic person isn't the same fear as that of a predator. It's a deeper fear. A fear of the internal unknown, a fear of confronting that which we prefer to ignore, and that explains why the awakened, highly sensitive person is feared. They represent everything that others haven't dared to become. But wait, there's something even deeper going on here, and this will completely change how you understand your own journey and your impact on the world. There's a concept that Huberman has discussed extensively in his episodes on neuroplasticity. He calls it self-directed adaptive plasticity. It's the ability to intentionally shape your brain through specific and consistent practices. Most people don't know this, but the awakened, highly sensitive person has a massive neurological advantage in this process. Why? Because their brain is already configured to process information in depth. The hyperactive insula, the engaged prefrontal cortex, the increased connectivity between brain regions. The 2024 study from BioRxiv specifies that brain activation patterns in individuals with high sensitivity indicate deep information processing, as suggested by increased activation in the precuneus, prefrontal cortex, and inferior frontal gyrus. They also suggest increased emotionality and empathy, reflected in increased activation in the insular, claustrum, amygdala, and cingulate cortex during social affective tasks. These aren't weaknesses. They are powerful neurological tools. The problem is that society has conditioned the awakened, highly sensitive person to see their nature as a defect. They've been taught to hide, to diminish themselves, to suppress that which makes them unique and valuable. And when they finally stop doing that, when they start using their sensitivity as the superpower it always was, the transformation is drastic and visible to everyone around. Carl Jung described this as the transcendent function, the ability to find a third way between seemingly irreconcilable opposites. For the awakened, highly sensitive person, this means finding the balance between feeling deeply and not being destroyed by what they feel. And that balance is rare, extremely rare. Research estimates that about 15 to 20% of the population possesses the trait of high sensitivity. That means over 1 billion people on the planet. But of those, how many go through the complete process of individuation? How many face the shadow? How many emerge genuinely integrated? A minuscule fraction. And that's why the awakened, highly sensitive person is rare. Not because being born sensitive is rare, but because the journey of transformation they go through is brutal. Most give up, most medicate, most distract themselves, most never face the nigredo to the end. But those who go through, those who emerge on the other side, carry something that can't be faked or imitated, a presence, a frequency, an authenticity that functions like a walking lie detector. And that's absolutely terrifying for those who are still living a lie. Now let me tell you something that will connect this with the specific dynamic between awakened, highly sensitive people and narcissists. Because this relationship reveals profound mechanisms that most never understand. An article published on the platform Medium, written by a medical doctor specializing in trauma, describes the educated empath as the narcissist's worst nightmare. She uses exactly that expression, worst nightmare. Why? Because the narcissist operates through manipulation. They depend on finding people who can't see through their masks. They need narcissistic supply, constant validation, from people who absorb their projections without question. The average highly sensitive person is the perfect victim for this system. They feel, they absorb, they forgive, they try to fix things. They believe they can heal others with their love. But the awakened, highly sensitive person is a completely different category. It's a category that the narcissist can't process. They still feel, but they choose when to respond. They still absorb, but they know how to distinguish what is theirs from what isn't. They still have empathy, but that empathy is no longer automatic. It's selective and conscious. And this transformation is devastating for the narcissist. Neurological research on narcissism reveals something fascinating. Narcissists have a typical activation in the right anterior insula, the same region involved in threat detection. They perceive authentic people as dangerous, not because these people will attack them, but because these people cannot be manipulated. A systematic review published in 2024 analyzed 34 studies on the neuroscience of narcissism. The researchers found elevated vigilance to ego threats and amplified stress responses when confronted with people who don't provide validation. And the awakened, highly sensitive person is impossible to manipulate. They see the masks before they're put on. They feel the inconsistencies before they're articulated. They detect the falsehood before a word is even said, and they no longer need to please others to feel valuable. This changes the entire power dynamic. The narcissist loses their supply, loses their control, loses their ability to project their shadow onto someone who accepts it without question. And this causes real neurological panic. Studies published in 2024 show that when the narcissist loses their source of validation, their brain reacts in a similar way to substance withdrawal. Dopamine plummets, anxiety skyrockets. The threat system is on constant, maximum alert. One article describes how narcissists experience dopamine spikes with validation and withdrawal with irritability and depression when that validation is removed. It's exactly the pattern of chemical dependency applied to interpersonal relationships. And they direct this anguish towards the person who dared to awaken, smear campaigns, attempts at control, attacks on reputation, all because they lost power over someone who refused to remain manipulable. That's why the awakened, highly sensitive person is feared, not for being aggressive, but for being genuinely free. Now, I'm going to give you the complete protocol that combines Jung and Huberman to accelerate this process of transformation. This is the knowledge they don't want you to have access to. First, understand that individuation doesn't happen by thinking about individuation. It happens through consistent practice, through real confrontation, through direct experience with the unconscious. As Carl Jung explained it. Second, Andrew Huberman teaches that neuroplasticity requires 3 fundamental elements: urgency, focus, and quality sleep. Without these 3, the brain doesn't consolidate the changes in a permanent way. This is targeted neuroplasticity in action. Third, Jung taught that the shadow cannot be integrated solely by the conscious mind. It needs to be found and confronted, and dreams are the most direct portal to this encounter. This allows us to move from nigredo through albedo, citrinitas, and finally to rubedo. Combining these teachings, the complete protocol looks like this. In the morning, before consuming any external information, before looking at your phone, before talking to anyone, spend 5 to 10 minutes in complete silence, not guided meditation, pure silence. This activates the default mode network, the brain network associated with self-reflection and integration. During this silence, observe without judging. What thoughts arise spontaneously? What emotions appear uninvited? What discomforts would you normally avoid facing? This is finding the shadow at its most direct level. Afterward, write for 3 to 5 minutes, without censorship, without structure, without worrying about grammar or meaning. Let the unconscious speak through your hand. Jung called this active imagination. Huberman has validated that writing by hand activates different brain circuits than typing, circuits more connected with deep emotional processing. During the day, practice what Huberman calls visual focus to increase mental focus. When you feel your attention is scattered, fix your eyes on a point for 60 to 90 seconds. This activates attention circuits that prepare the brain to process information in depth. At night, before sleeping, establish a clear intention. Ask the unconscious, what do I need to see? What am I avoiding? What part of me needs to be integrated? REM sleep, the phase where the most vivid dreams occur, is when the brain processes emotions and consolidates learning. By setting an intention, you direct this processing in a conscious way. Upon waking, before moving your body, before opening your eyes completely, try to remember the dreams. Write down fragments, isolated words, bodily sensations, images that persist. This cycle, repeated consistently for 90 days, accelerates individuation in a measurable way. Research shows that practitioners of contemplative techniques have reduced activation in the default mode network during normal waking states. This means less rumination, less self-criticism, more genuine presence. And presence is exactly what the awakened, highly sensitive person carries as their trademark. But let me be completely honest about something important. This process isn't comfortable. You'll find things in yourself that you'd rather not see. You'll face truths you've spent a lifetime avoiding. You'll have moments of wanting to give up. And that's exactly why it works. Jung said that we don't find enlightenment by imagining figures of light. We find it by making the darkness conscious. And Huberman confirms that genuine neurological growth happens on the edge of discomfort. Not in comfort, on the edge of what's tolerable. The highly sensitive person who chooses to take this journey is choosing the most difficult path possible, but also the most transformative that exists. And when they emerge, Something has changed permanently in their neurological and psychological structure. They no longer need the approval of others. Their sense of worth comes from within, not because they've convinced themselves that they're valuable, but because they've integrated the parts of themselves that doubted. They no longer absorb emotions automatically. Their nervous system has learned to regulate in a completely autonomous way. They feel without being destroyed by what they feel. They no longer fear confrontation, not because they've become aggressive, but because their silence carries more weight than 1,000 empty words. And they no longer need to prove anything to absolutely anyone. Their presence speaks for itself. This is the awakened, highly sensitive person, rare, feared, and completely free. Now, if you've made it this far, it's likely that something in these words resonated deeply with your own experience. It's probable that you recognize parts of your own journey in the descriptions. What you've just discovered isn't information that circulates freely. The connection between Jung and Huberman, between deep psychology and modern neuroscience, is still largely suppressed by traditional academia. Why? Because it empowers the individual. And power systems don't like genuinely empowered individuals. The super thanks isn't just a way to support this work, it's a declaration. It's you saying that this kind of knowledge needs to continue being revealed. When you click the golden heart, you're funding the next bridge between ancient wisdom and modern science. You're not a passive spectator. You're part of something significantly larger. But regardless of any support, the transformation has already begun. The fact that you've watched this far means that your unconscious recognized something essential. It means that the seed was planted in fertile ground. The process of individuation doesn't ask if you're ready. It simply begins when it's time to begin. And maybe it's time. Now I have a question for you, and I want you to be genuinely honest in the comments. Have you ever noticed that your presence bothers certain people? For no apparent reason. Have you felt that the more authentic you become, the more some relationships deteriorate inexplicably? Comment below. Tell your experience. Because every shared story illuminates the path for those who are still navigating in the darkness. And if you feel that you're in the middle of the Negredo now, if you're going through the darkest phase of the journey, know something important. The fact that you're here, seeking to understand, is already a clear sign that something in you is awakening. The darkness isn't the end, it's the beginning of everything. Jung mapped the way 100 years ago. Huberman validated the science in recent decades. And you are about to live the transformation that both described. The awakened, highly sensitive person isn't just rare, they are absolutely necessary. The world needs people who saw the truth, who faced their shadow, who chose to be whole instead of just functional. And if you felt that these words were specifically for you, they probably were. Awaken, integrate, transform. And let those who are still asleep wonder why your presence bothers them so much. There's something else I need to tell you before I finish. Something that's rarely discussed even in the circles that study Jung and Huberman. The awakened, highly sensitive person doesn't just transform themselves. They transform the environment around them. Their presence creates a field of authenticity that affects everyone who comes into contact with them. Studies of social neuroscience show that emotional states are contagious. This works through mirror neurons. When you're near someone, your brain automatically mirrors the neural activation patterns of that person. Now think about what this means for the awakened, highly sensitive person. They carry a neural pattern of integration, of authenticity, of presence, and that pattern is contagious. Some people respond to this with openness. They feel that they can be more authentic near them, that they can lower their masks, that they can finally breathe. Other people respond with resistance, with discomfort, with hostility. Why? because the integrated presence of the highly sensitive person activates their own unintegrated shadow. And that creates a natural division. The people who are ready to grow gravitate toward the awakened, highly sensitive person. The people who aren't ready move away or attack. Jung called this the phenomenon of the constellated self. When someone manifests a high degree of individuation, they become a pole of attraction for those on similar journeys, and a pole of repulsion for those who resist their own transformation. Fuchs and colleagues, in a 2025 paper, created what they call the first mathematical framework unifying diverse domains of experience. They connected each term to psychological constructs and showed how it captures key phenomena described in deep psychology and science of consciousness. This means that science is finally catching up to what Jung intuited a century ago. Individuation isn't just a metaphor. It's a real process, with measurable neurological correlates. And the highly sensitive person who goes through this process becomes something that common language can't adequately describe. Rare isn't enough. Fear doesn't capture all the complexity. Maybe the best word is necessary. The current world is in a crisis of authenticity. Social networks create increasingly elaborate personas. The pressure for conformity has never been so intense. The masks multiply. And in this context, people who have chosen integration instead of fragmentation become beacons, not because they proclaim themselves superior, but because their simple existence demonstrates that another way of being is possible. You can be sensitive and strong at the same time. You can feel deeply and not be destroyed. You can see the truth and still choose love. This isn't fantasy. It's neuroscience applied to ancient wisdom. And if you've made it to the end of this video, you probably already know this on some level. Your unconscious recognized the message before your conscious mind processed the words. The question isn't if you will awaken. The question is, when will you stop resisting the process that's already begun? The awakened, highly sensitive person is rare and feared and necessary, and maybe that's you.